All right, well, let's get started. What I want to talk with you today is about the concept of a literature review that we call the systematic review, and share with you how it can benefit your long-term research and writing. Now, the introduction to today's presentation is the systematic review, foundation for long-term success in research and writing. And I want to jump ahead to this slide, to the third slide, to kind of try to get excited about this, right? So where and how to begin and why do we do this, right? So this is what I want to, if I can do this today, that'll be great. If I can suggest a strategy so powerful that it can carry you to the gates of mastery and publication in your field, right? So, right, we can do this together, right? Well, this is the question I pose for this presentation. What is this powerful secret, right? What is the secret to success in the research that we want to conduct, okay? So with that, a brief review of the outline that I have for you today. We start off here, where to begin, the powerful secret. So I've introduced that. And then I'm going to jump into identifying types of literature. And I'm going to discuss quite a bit into this area, gray literature. It's a kind of side topic to the systematic review, but it's important. And then how we include and exclude literature in our work. I want to touch on annotated bibliography because it's part of the structure of the systematic review, and talk a little bit about organizing files and folders. This is something that's helped me a lot in my work. And then I'll share a couple of case studies or case examples with you. Maybe 4 or 5 slides on a paper that I wrote here, and I think this paper you're aware of, my Thai geography paper, a few slides on that. Okay, and then in the end, we talk about the conclusion of this and the idea of its silver bullet. Okay, so the answer to the question, what's the powerful secret, is it's a systematic review. And what I would say, I would call it like this: it's the art of a super literature review. And as I present this morning, you'll get the idea of why I say use the word super and what that means. Okay. Okay, everybody ready for me to jump into the serious stuff?
Yeah.
Just say yes, you know.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So a systematic review is, these are my own words, but it's a straightforward methodology applied, originally actually applied in medical research and now used in the social sciences. It was brought into tourism studies, and which really made the mainstream social sciences by a professor named Reed in 2006. You see down here below. And so in general, what is this concept of a systematic review? It's the idea, if you think about it in terms of medical science, okay, and you may have heard these analysis in medical science. Let's say a certain type of heart procedure was done that focuses on one part of the heart. And there were, let's say there was research done all over the world, and there's maybe there's 50 pieces of research in the world on this kind of heart surgery, right? And so what was created many years ago was the idea that they gather those 50 pieces of research on that type of surgery and then analyze all the procedures and the outcomes from those studies and create a new study. So it's like one study based on all the studies. Now that might sound easy or sound direct, but there's a lot to it, of course, because we have to decide what's in and what's out, and how, you know, we have to pinpoint exactly what we're talking about as we get into this methodology, right? But you can see the value. I think that's my point. The value of systematic review as it started in the medical sciences, right? And then only in recent years entered into social sciences, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so As a method, it's an opportunity to investigate and master and present the research. So a systematic review may include, a qualitative approach and also a quantitative approach to the literature. And I have a few slides on this, so I won't say too much more now, but the idea that we review the literature in different ways, right, including statistically, okay? And again, I'll talk about that in a little bit. It's also a documentary analysis. So this can be very useful in terms of us understanding research productivity, for example, where the research is coming from and what areas, what subtopics and such are in the literature. This, what I mean here by facilitates an understanding of scholarly output, we also get to know who the scholars are. And there's a value in this, right? So that we can begin to know a literature or a topic that we're doing our research on, and we get to know who the scholars are. And I'll talk a little more about this later, about the value of that, of knowing, who's who in a field of study. And lastly, it's a comprehensive field of study in its own right. A systematic review is its own type of research activity. And I'll jump ahead to a slide I have later just to ring a bell in your mind to think about that. One of the interesting parts of this, one of the interesting aspects of this kind of work is that it's not only is it highly publishable, but it also can be done at your desk, right? So now we have our coronavirus era. If we can publish high quality research without leaving our desk, that's quite valuable, right, for us today. Quite significant, right, for us today. Okay, so identifying types of literature. Now, I'm not sure if you've really thought of this before, but of course we all know that the good quality, the big stuff is here, right? Journals are going to be number one in general when we talk about identifying types of literature for our systematic review. Books are great, but it's often a bit difficult to mine the information that we want out of a big book, right? It's a bit different. And of course, book chapters are challenging because we don't always know where they are. They're hard to find sometimes. They're kind of buried in the book, right? And also quite often not available online, right? As well as the book can be like that too. We have to buy these journals. We can often get around one way or another to get the information. Yeah. Conference proceedings, okay, but less, generally speaking, less significant than journals and books. And we should keep this in mind as a published research. This is okay. Newspapers of record. John Kisine, have you heard of this one before? Newspapers of record?
No.
These are newspapers that keep their records, right? Like the New York Times or the Washington Post, possibly even, I'm trying to think in Thailand, what's number one? Maybe Bangkok Post or something like that. Yeah. So that they have a record of what they've said. So this is actually considered published work. And newspapers do have research in them. Somebody did a study and they have it in the newspaper. But it should be, this is the key word, of record. Yeah, of record. So that we can go and find the microfilm or find the evidence that this really exists. Okay. Okay, don't worry. I'm not going to go through this whole thing as long as I just did this. All right. All right. So the next thing in here is about gray literature. And this, I have a few slides on, so I'm going to talk about this in some detail later. But I just want us to think about this. Gray literature. Gray literature, in a sense, means unpublished or published to some degree. So that's why it's gray. It's, we're not sure, right? theses and dissertations are generally considered a type of gray literature. Commissioned works, stuff through not-for-profit organizations, government reports, for example, corporate sector stuff, private sector, websites. So this is something opens up a whole discussion about citing or using work that's from websites in our work, right? And certainly if we're going to have a systematic approach, do we include that or not? Videos is the whole upcoming area, right? Yeah, and then other electronic sources. So basically, if we take this first row here, right? And if we're doing a systematic review, first we have to clearly define, are we only using published research? Or are we going to include gray literature in our work? And that's a decision we have to make, right? Both or either or not. And once we've made that decision, we can look at the research sort of mathematically. This is what makes a systematic review kind of interesting, that we can look at the pieces of research, we can look at institutional contributors, we can look at authors, we can look at infometrics and bibliometrics. Let me talk about this a little bit later, this statistical approach, right? And then, of course, this one we might be more familiar with, research topics. Of course, we look for the themes, theories, trends, etc. in research topics. And then, of course, in presenting our results, how do we come across presenting the results of our systematic review? And that's up to us, how we do that. And I'll come to that more. I'm still at the introduction stage here for this, on this slide, right? Okay, so, and then the outcomes and benefits, which I want to really bring this to light as I go through the presentation. The value of mastering the literature of a subject, being able to identify knowledge gaps. I think we all remember that from doing our PhDs, that we have to find a knowledge gap to exploit or explain in our work. And we can also create a database here of authors and files and references. And after our systematic review, we can move on to other types of reviews that are similar, that maybe are part of our systematic review, or something we publish after the trend analysis or meta-analysis. Now this slide's the same thing. The slide's the same as the last slide. All I've done is put it in circles. Okay, so we can kind of just look at it quickly. Systematic review, and we have three concepts coming out of it. One is the quantity of research. I won't read this to you. You can see here. We can look at research by its quantity and its bibliometrics. We can look at the published research, as I discussed, and we can look at the gray literature, right? In any case, all three of these areas really come down to identifying the topics, right, that come out of systematically looking at a body of research, okay? And then we present our results. That's basically writing our paper. And then I'm hoping that this is where the excitement is here, as you saw in the previous slide. What's the outcome of doing this? Let me stop there. That's a lot that I just raffled off. Anyone has any question or comment about all of that? Anything jump out at you?
Actually, I have some question related to the documentary analysis. I face some problem while I try to publish like a paper. I try to review like when I try to publish the paper of systematic review, what will be the base methodology it is?
Okay, well, actually, it's a good question. So, Amelia, the methodology is systematic review. So systematic review is the method.
Yeah.
And then, right, then here's the beautiful thing about it. The systematic review is whatever you want it to be. And the scholars can argue that you didn't include everything or you didn't something, but that's not, in the end, you'll get published if you do it right, because you have done what you said you were going to do, if that makes sense, right? So for example, let me...
Is that we call the literature?
Well, it is a type of, this is much deeper than just literature review, right? So because we come at it from so many different types of analysis, we're not just reviewing the literature, we're analyzing a large body of literature. And the key idea is that you create that body of literature. That body of literature is created by you based on criteria that you have put forth and explained in your methodology. So for example, a super strong systematic review is just doing journals. And you might say journals from the year 2000 to the year 2020. So this, you could say, for example, opening paragraph, this research analyzes journal articles published from the year 2000 to the year 2020, and then on your given subject, right?
Okay.
Right, and then you analyze it however you say you're going to analyze it. And that means all these different ways. See, normally our regular literature review is kind of here. That's sort of a normal literature review, right? But you might decide you're going to do this. You might do a systematic study of journals and showing research productivity, and that's it. Somebody else can come along and say, well, you didn't give a narrative of the literature, but that's not what you said you were going to do. You said you're going to do research productivity, right? So the beautiful thing about systematic review is you put yourself in your own box. And it's highly academic because you're really clear about what you're doing. Does that make sense?
Okay. Previously, I put literature-based analysis. What do you think on this word? I mean, should I? I'm not sure. Is that correct enough to put as a literature-based analysis?
Yeah, I think you need to be more clear about what the analysis is. Right. In the title, you might not have to, and just the big title on top. But then as you begin to, in your abstract or in your introduction of your paper, you need to get real sharp, real clear about what the analysis is, right? You say base analysis, but you'd have to explain that, right? Base meaning, something.
Thank you.
Good. Okay, great. So I think we're on track here now. I really appreciate that question. Okay, so I want to jump into like a sidebar. I've already made it clear that this is where the heavy stuff is here, right? But when we do systematic review, we really have to think, depending upon the field of study, are we going to open up the gray literature? Are we going to go there? You might decide no. You might say in your methods, this paper will not discuss gray literature. Or you could say this paper is including it, or it's only, this research is based on gray literature. Something like that, right? So it's our choice. And I think it's a really hot topic. And so I just can't help but make a joke here. So everyone saw the movie Shades of Grey? 50 Shades of Grey?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just teasing you. I just want to say there's more than 50, Yeah. What I mean by that is it's kind of infinite. It's kind of endless, all this different gray literature. It's a can of worms, right? But it can also be very, very valuable. As you'll see later in the presentation, this became highly significant for my research on Thai geography, which there's not a single published book on Thai geography, right? And so we get shoved into the gray literature. Our students get shoved into the gray literature, whether they like it or not. You know, you're searching websites and anything you can find on that subject, Thai geography, right? So some examples are here. I gave these basically earlier, on the earlier slide, so it's all stuff to think about. Think about if you would like me to explain any of these. I'm afraid to talk your ear off and go down this list and explain what these are. Maybe we can come back to this if you like, right? These all have different meanings. They're all quite interesting. Yeah, this kind of high-end, this kind of high-end unpublished research. Yeah. Negatives of gray literature are, of course, accessibility issues, whether it's available or not. So let's say a commission study, or let's say a government report on mining sector, like where the resources are for mining. It may not be public, right? So it might be difficult to get that, or a corporate sector on economic impact study. Let's say for a given, I like to use surf tourism. For example, Quicksilver did an economic impact study of their surfing contest, the value of their surfing contest to their sales in Phuket. Can you get that? And the answer is no. Quicksilver's not going to release their tricks of how they made their money because the other surf companies want to grab that and do what they did and make money, right? So a valuable report, but not available through normal channels. This is my point, right? So that's accessibility issues, right, for the negatives. And then ephemera, this is quite a good word. I hadn't heard of it until a few years ago, my own word. But ephemera is stuff that we say here today, gone tomorrow. So maybe a small newspaper that's not of record, like an internet blog, unpublished posters. You know, we can find lots of PowerPoint files often on subjects on the internet, but can we cite that? Can we really use that in our work? There's challenges for that, right? So we call that, another word for ephemera is transient literature, right? Here today, gone tomorrow. Positives for the gray literature, why we don't want to just push gray literature aside and just say, well, then if it's complicated, you know, forget it, right? We want to establish that it is quite valuable, actually, and in some cases, extremely valuable. And one aspect is this, it's unrestricted. So, for example, an economic impact study could be 500 pages, you know, whereas we know the journal article, they cut us off usually at about 25 pages, right? Usually they won't let us have more than 25 or 30 pages maximum. And of course, probably less than 10 in a scientific journal, and 10 pages about the maximum, right, for a scientific paper, right? So it's unrestricted. The other thing is speed of dissemination. So those of you who know me from this Thai geography research I did, I spent 5 years, you know, trying to get that published, you know. Publication process was 5 years. But with gray literature, they can send it right out. I mean, for that matter, you or I could build a web page and put it online tomorrow, and there it is. You know, it's fast, right? And that has value, right? It's in your hand today, and you can learn from it, right? And also potentially unlimited in scope and detail and length. A lot of the NGO stuff is like that. Your not-for-profit and non-governmental studies can be like this, unlimited in scope and length. Yep. There's just 2 slides here. So the second one now is, we can talk about this in gray literature, deliberately gray. That means it's specifically intended for a certain type of research, right? I talked about speed of dissemination just there briefly. Another thing about great literature is it can be a window to developing field of research. So back when I published my first systematic review, this was the case with surfing tourism, right? Because it was a new field and there was very little published. And for tourism studies, it's quite unique. Now for niche tourism, right? Now we have like a geotourism, for example, and there's not much published on that, right? But yet you'll find stuff on the internet. In our case, where this became quite valuable was when John New 10 years ago asked me if I could teach Thai geography, right? Because they were in a bind, and then everything was great. Basically, I had to build a whole class on great literature. Okay. Now is where we get down to the, can we say the nitty gritty, get down to the real detail of what a systematic review is, okay? So before I jump into this, any other question, anybody? Based on anything about great literature that's interesting?
Yes, I have, but I'm not sure that is interesting or not. But for thesis, is that like, I mean, which shade of gray? Is that dark gray or light gray for thesis?
Excellent
I mean,
question.
I have put some, sorry?
Good question. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so for a thesis, well, let me start to say there's different kinds of theses, right? And dissertations, right? There's different kinds, meaning some theses are may actually have published work in them. My PhD did. I put 3 journal articles inside my PhD, right? And so that was. But I think in general, a thesis is pretty strong. A thesis is pretty strong, especially at the doctoral level. At the undergraduate and master level, maybe less so. But it may depend upon the work and the university and some other criteria, right? But it's definitely okay to cite master's and PhD theses in your research. Absolutely, right? In many cases, it's very important. Yeah. So if we say, you know, if I guess we'd have to decide if light gray is high quality and dark gray is low quality, or the other way around.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Maybe light
you.
gray, it sees the light, you know. I think so. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And in fact, Millie, you know, you could do a whole systematic review just of doctoral theses. You could just say, you know, this review is of doctoral theses on this subject from this year to this year, right? And not even use journals, not even use other things. So, you know, anything's possible, right? Okay, great. So let's continue. Now we're talking about how you include or exclude the literature, right? So what is a systematic review? It's about you setting the boundaries of what's in and what's out. This is actually the beautiful thing about it, is that you decide, right? I said earlier, you could say only journal articles published between certain years, for example, right? So this just comes back to the great literature. I think I explained that pretty well. We really have to decide if we're going to use it or not. And if we do, if we are going to use great literature, we have to jump into accessibility criteria. In other words, you have to explain that really well about what's in and what's out. And if we have time, I'll show. If we have time, I'll show some examples of a paper. So we talk here about developing the eligibility criteria. And here it is. I explain it to you. So if you decide to do some work in this area, this can help a lot. Okay. We need to have the names, authors, venue, date, some accountable record for any kind of presentation. This is for PhD stuff. This is for NPO, organizations, commissioned research and stuff like that. I see, yeah. And then for journal articles. I suppose for journal articles to cite, we should have volume and page numbers, but DOI is of course fine, right? If we have the DOI number and then we put in press or something like that, that's fine. Yeah. And then for books, yeah. So what we have here is we have to define how we're going to identify eligibility criteria, how we're going to allow those papers to be included, if it's a conference paper, if it's a master's, PhD, even could be honors work at the bachelor's level, and not-for-profit reports, etc. Again, the beautiful thing is that you develop that criteria, and whether someone agrees with you or not is another, it's another thing, because you have been clear about what you're doing. So in terms of scientifically, you're sound because you've set your boundaries, right, is the key point. The next topic is in leading into the systematic review, it's really successful to do an annotated bibliography. Has anyone ever done an annotated bibliography before? Amelia, can you help me out? Have you ever done one?
No, I'm not.
You have not? But you've heard of it, right, before?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So an annotation, that's like like something you pulled out, or a summary, kind of like, right? Yeah. So in creating an annotated bibliography, so once you've got a set of 10 or 20, let's say, pieces of research, you could first begin to write the reference for each file, like let's say we have here, right? And then pick your formatting style, I guess, whatever, APA, whatever, right? And then you write a synopsis of the research, different functions or different purposes. One of them is that you don't forget what that paper is. So, once you have 100 pieces of research, maybe, that you're going to analyze, sometimes you forget which is which, and, it can be kind of confusing. I made an annotated bibliography that was kind of in a trend analysis approach once, and I put this picture from that one, and I made it colorful and different things because it was just for me, it wasn't for anybody else. And I put what kind of research it was so I didn't forget. Like, if it's a book chapter, and then I have the reference here, and then what that discusses in general, right? What you might find later as you develop this, that you can actually cut and paste your own synopsis of each piece of literature together. If you start trying to develop a specific theme or a specific topic within, like, subtopic within the research, you can come back and say, like, if you decide you're going to talk about Hawaii for some reason, you can come back and you could see, oh yeah, this paper talks about Hawaii. And you could grab that text because it's your synopsis, and then you cite it, right, accordingly, and such, and go down. So in this case, this is my own style of an annotated bibliography. Often they just simply go alphabetically by author without putting in this years. In this case, you can see all of these are 1999. In my case, I wanted to do this for a reason. And then this piece, let's say a journal article or a master's thesis here, right? Okay, so this is an introduction to annotated bibliography. Another approach to creating an annotated bibliography, being really detailed about it, right? So you could take each piece of research that you're going to include in your study, and you could not only write a synopsis of each one, right? But you could also analyze the paper kind of carefully and look at what's the paper's contribution to the field of study, for example, right? And then there's a whole nother approach, which could be the methods I've seen systematic reviews in the medical literature where they only do the methods, right? So that a type of heart surgery that there'll be like someone will analyze all the different methods of heart surgery of that specific type. And then another medical doctor can come and see all the different ways that people did that exact type of surgery before, right? So quite interesting that your whole systematic review, if you think about it now, could actually be just a synopsis, a synopsis of the literature, or it could just look at contributions of the literature, or it could look at methods, or another criteria that you create, right? It might only look at recommendations or only suggestions for future research. Okay, this is just a template, and I'm giving this now to the students in searching and referencing course that we're now teaching, just to show them, you know, like the context, right? That you write a reference, make a summary, write a reference, make a summary, and I provided an example. In this case, I was just showing that in this book on water-based tourism from my surf tourism review that I did, my annotation that you see here in this picture, yeah, my annotation here, it's for the book by Jennings, but in his book, Jennings, in his introduction, talks about surfing tourism. So, you know, the book's not on surf tourism, but I can include it even though it's on water-based tourism. So, but one of my point that I'm making here is that my annotation is about my goal, which is publishing the surf tourism paper. So my annotation only talks about surf tourism, right? I don't need to tell you what Jennings' book's all about. I just want to talk about what Jennings has to say about my topic, if you follow me, right? So you're pulling, your annotation is tailored to your paper, right? Does that make sense? Now on to organizing files and folders. So when you do a systematic review, you're dealing often with quite a few pieces of research. I published a paper some years ago on surfing tourism, and it was a systematic review paper. And I located, based on my criteria, 156 pieces of research. And that was a lot to manage, right? So you can see here how I'm going to bring this up to the screen now, okay, if you can see this. Okay, everyone can see this one?
Yes, the file, right?
Yeah, so you see, I have a folder and it says 156 my master papers, like my master knowledge for surfing tourism and for this particular paper. And by making each file alphabetical order to match my reference list exactly, I always know where the paper is. Let's say this paper here from Buckley, right? So if I go to my reference list, it's going to be Buckley 2000 with the name of the paper in the reference list. But here I have the actual file. It'll open right up. Now look at this file. It looks kind of strange, doesn't it? Kind of weird, right? How come? Well, it's because this was actually something that was kind of on the edge of the gray literature. It was presented at a conference. And in my literature review, my systematic review, I allowed this kind of work. And so we go back here and look at this. And let's look at it here. So we can see Buckley 2000, the name of the paper. Note that the abbreviated name, because you can't put the whole name in your file. Usually it's too long. So I abbreviate the name and then I put where it came from. I can immediately see that this came from a conference. So I hope I'm not boring you guys to death with this, but what I'm trying to show you is the mechanics, the system behind organizing files and folders and details so that you can master your subject and publish multiple papers. This is the goal here, right? You do this hard work and you're set yourself up on a given topic to publish many papers because you have everything systematically organized, right? Even here for these two papers, these are published in the same year by the same author, and 2002A and B is exactly how it's going to appear in my final paper, right? And in this case, I have the name of the journal, right? The reason that this file that I showed you looks kind of funny is that I made it. This is a kind of a point that I would like to share. I've actually contacted Buckley and said, I found record of a conference that you presented at, but I can't find anything about it anywhere. And I emailed him personally and said, can you send me something? And he sent me this. And it's really funny because he sent it to me in the mail, right? So I got a letter and it had this folded up in it. And then what I did was scan it, put it on a Word file, and then make a PDF. The reason I'm telling you this is I would like you to look at this 156 pieces of research that you see here that I published this paper. And if you look, every single one is a PDF, right? You see PDF, PDF, PDF. So I don't care what kind of, if I scan this from a book, I'm going to make a PDF file out of it. Like this one here by Ryan, I believe this chapter. Yeah, okay. Something, yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so anyways, you got the idea here, right? And then maybe the last point to make is this one on this file organization is that, did you see this one down here at the bottom? It says Williams. It's a bachelor thesis, and I have the word find. Sometimes you can't get your hands on every single thing, but you know it exists. So find means find it, you know? And what have I made with that? All I've been able to do was I've made the reference. So look at my annotated bibliography. I found something that somebody wrote about this thesis. This thesis was unavailable. And so I have this kind of 2-page blurry sort of thing. That's something I'd found that had this table. What it was this was published in another piece of research used this piece of research. If that makes sense. And so I've pulled that out so that I have a record of it, right? Because my goal was to collect everything published on this topic, period. Yeah, and included this. So fine. So again, what I'm trying to share with you is, I guess, is my system of how I organize literature for, you know, in writing research papers, right? And I hope this has been valuable. This is valuable for you. Any questions about that? I know that's quite an earful.
I think you organize things very well. Huh?
Yeah, I'm a little bit strange in that way. Maybe sometimes too much. You know, I get really into the details, right? You have to be careful not to go overboard. But here, you know, you can see back to the presentation, and that the concept here is that what I want to say is that, again, if you go to this level, so you know, we all have different fields and different topics, right? Like for example, Amelia, you said you're working on a research. What's the topic?
I'm doing now on the entrepreneur.
Okay, an entrepreneurship of.
But it's I mean the I just first start on the entrepreneur, I mean halal entrepreneur, focusing on the Muslim food
Oh,
consumer.
good. Great, great. Okay,
Yeah.
good. Okay, yeah, I got it. So as you collect your literature, right, you can begin to organize it like this over here, like I've shown on this, you know, like this, right? Right, right. That you do the author's last name and the author's last name, year, abbreviated title, and then the journal or what the source is, right? Sometimes, I'm sorry, I blurred this up. It's a bit of a mistake there, but sometimes if it's a book chapter, I'll put the page numbers so that I remember when I'm citing or when I'm, you know, going for this, I know sort of what, exactly where it came from, okay? Mm-hmm. So I could see a list like this of authorship or of research on halal entrepreneurship. And I'm guessing, Amelia, that in your work, you're inevitably, you're going to get pushed into the gray literature because there may not be a lot of journals published or books.
Yes.
Right. So welcome to my world.
Yes.
Welcome to my
Thank
world.
you.
And as you get pushed into this
Thank you.
gray area, you need to get in your mind how you're going to manage the gray literature. And it's not that hard. It's just that you need to separate it into the different segments of gray literature, right? I heard you before, you mentioned theses.
Yeah.
So obviously you found some theses or dissertations. And then, you know, there may be some articles in the Bangkok Post and et cetera. And then you have to kind of separate those, right? Yeah. But I think here, as long as you have the author's last name first and you take the time to just make a PDF file, whether you got to tape it onto a piece of cardboard and take a photo and then change that to PDF, everything PDF, everything loads the same across your bar. Boom, 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 right? So you have a master file. All right. Good, okay. Okay, so enough on this. I'm checking our time. We're at 10:30, so don't be scared of the numbers here. I can see it looks like I'm halfway through, but I think we're more than halfway. This is just something I created once for a presentation. It's just everything that I've said to you, and it's a handout that sometimes I give for this type of talk. The idea is that, let's see here, let me use this system here. Yeah. Is that we're going this way down is my idea. Okay, so that, you know, we locate and organize the files. So you find them, you download them, you convert to PDF, you know, you review them, you know, you rename the articles as I said, and then it looks like this, which you saw my system basically, right? And then you develop the second thing. So this is like part one. And then the second thing is you do the annotated bibliography. So imagine that the 156 pieces of research that I showed you in my file, I have an annotation like this for every single one. And this really helped me to master the literature, right? Yeah. And then the third part is you start to do this. You start to identify and build your themes. This is basic literature review stuff, but as you know now, in the systematic review, we can get quantitative about it, and I'll give you examples in a minute. Yeah, but again, yeah, the idea is that this moves down, right? And this, of course, moved across. Just trying to make an infographic. That's all this is, right? So no big deal. All right, now I've got 5 slides on the paper on tourism that I published. And John Kisane, did you hear me? I mentioned I did send this to you, didn't I?
A long time ago, yes.
Okay, if you have the file, if anybody, you can either email at John Kisane or email me if you want the paper. Okay, I've obviously got this copy. So when I set out in my second master degree, some of you know I did after Taiwan. I came to Thailand. I did the MBA in building 2, a second master degree, right? And I did surf tourism for my thesis. And when I started this, I couldn't find anything. Like I couldn't find literature on surf tourism. I was batty, as they say. How can I do a thesis on a topic that there's no literature, right? And so out of that frustration was born my systematic review, because I was a tiger. And for days, for weeks, for months, for years, I searched the internet and slowly began to build a body of research. And that's what my systematic review was. And it was built mainly on gray literature, right? Later, I did it on Thai geography, of course, and I'll share with you that. This paper was well received and quickly published because of its value to the field of study, at least in terms of what the editor at Journal of Sport and Tourism thought. He got this paper, he went to publication in 2 weeks. It was amazing. So sometimes your systematic review, if it's done right, can really move along quickly, right? Because it's very clear. In my paper, I did this quantitative, qualitative, and I also had a trend analysis, right? And so I took this approach in my systematic review, which is an evidence-based infometric approach to the development and content of in current state of surf tourism, right? So I know this sounds wordy and I hate to read it to you, but appreciate, I think it's valuable if you look at it. Because what happened inevitably was that I was able to identify intellectual linkages which could be counted and then look at the growth and productivity in the field of study. And I'll explain more why this became so valuable. And secondly, my 156 pieces of literature that you saw, my library, if you will. We can use this term, maybe you've heard of this before, a seminal body. So that's like a complete or original body of research within a given frame, right? And there's actually a word for it. It's a great word. You may or may not have heard this word before, a corpus. So when you do a systematic review, you actually create a corpus of literature. A corpus means, again, like seminal body, a complete body of research, one of a kind, first ever compilation of research. Amelia, using you as an example for your halal entrepreneurship in halal culinary or halal behavior, or just call it halal. If you create a corpus of literature, in other words, you collect everything on entrepreneurship and of halal, you will be able to not only publish your systematic review, but you should be able to publish a string of papers after this, because you can come at it from trend, you can come at it from different ways. And ultimately, the idea is that you've mastered the literature. You know, I can meet you in the hallway at PSU and ask you a question, and you'll say, oh, well, these are the key authors in this area, right? Because you've mastered it, right? And once you master the literature in your field or your topic area, you set yourself up for multiple papers. And so many people have wondered how possibly did I publish 5 Web of Science journal articles on surf tourism in 2 years and complete my PhD in 2 years with 5 papers. And the answer to the question is because I did this systematic review that you see here. Because I mastered the literature. And let's move on and look at the implications of mastering the literature a little bit, okay? So for example, because I don't want to talk everybody's ear off here for too long and keep within the time difference. I have so much to say. This paper is quite large. But as example, okay, so here's an example of some results of this paper. So here's one table. So what I did is I looked at all 156 pieces of research and identified locations, right? So in other words, where did they study? So surf tourism research, where did they study? And I found, let's say here, you can see 30 pieces are global, and then how many were in Australia. I made a subset, like whether it was the east or the south or the west of Australia, they're quite different places. New Zealand and USA, I further segmented USA because of Hawaii in particular. It's a different world, you know. And Indonesia, quite interesting, in Europe and Oceania. Okay, so I created this table. And then I posed the question to you here today, where might we consider conducting research? So now we see the places that research has been conducted. So turning that around, where has it not been conducted? And if you look down this list, the answer would be a lot of places. For example, well, you know, Thailand's on here with 5, but they're all mine, you know. So, you know, but basically Thailand was 0 at the beginning, you know, Thailand was 0. But what we can do is we could just pick a country. I mean, we could look at Latin America and there's no Argentina here, right? So any study on surf tourism in Argentina will be the first, right? So this is what this has done here is, if we look at the locations, is we can quickly see research gaps just pop up, right? Research gaps. And in this case, just talking about location, we're not even talking about other research gaps. So we can see there's quite a few, right? So this is valuable as a researcher because we know where the gaps are. Okay, the second one, to just run with the same idea, this one looked at research articles by journal. Okay, so based on these results, where might we consider publishing our research? Because that's the flip side of this systematic review is, you know, like any paper that we're going to write, we have to find a home for it. And it's good to actually have an idea of the home before we get too far along with the paper so that we tailor that paper to the journal or the place that we hope to publish it at, right? So if we look here, based on these results, where might we consider publishing our surf tourism research, okay? So if we see that in this screen grab here, this that I put in from my paper, we can see that the Journal of Coastal Research has 5 papers, and sometimes the journal, it's confusing sometimes with journal, they change their names and you have to make a note of that. I've done that here. Yeah, these are, okay, these here are down here are the articles which are dedicated to surf tourism. In other words, surf tourism is not just part of the research, it was dedicated to surf tourism, right? So Journal of Coastal Research, we can see is 2. Look at Journal of Sport and Tourism. So they had 3 articles, they have 3 published articles, and 3 of them were dedicated to surf tourism. And that actually makes the Journal of Sport and Tourism #1. So if you, at this point in time, if you had a research that's ready to get published on surf tourism, Journal of Sport and Tourism here might be your best bet because they're publishing research in this area. The editor knows what it is. When he gets it in his hand, he says, oh yeah, another one of these. Yeah, we got the market cornered on this. We're the guys for this. I'll accept this paper, or I'll send it to the reviewers at least, you know, and get it going. And then from here down, we can look and sort of add them. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Sorry for the rhetorical questions. Okay. One more time. Okay. So based on these results, who might we contact for an interview? I'm just trying to get a spark our concept in this, right? So, if we look at this table, which was a short list of prolific authorship in the field. So Amelia, in your halal topic, you'll soon know who the prolific authors are. I should be able to ask you in a few months, so who's publishing in this area? And you say, oh, Dr. something something in Malaysia, he's got 5 papers, and I found the 3 papers by another professor in somewhere else. And then you know who's the top dog.
Exactly, Azan.
Yeah, who's the top dog
Yes.
in this field, right? So when we look here, we quickly see Buckley. And then what I've done is I've done back to what we saw earlier, bibliometrics. We start counting like citations and other criteria to look at the impact of the research. So we can see that Buckley had 89 citations on Google Scholar with all his work together. And he had 3 dedicated articles, 5 other pieces of research that included surf tourism, but weren't dedicated to surf tourism. And then he had 8 total. But he's top dog in terms of citation. So he's top dog in terms of a contribution to the field of study, or, this means everyone cites him, basically, right? When you write about surf tourism, you cite Buckley, okay? And then we can see Ponting has the most with 16 total pieces. Lazaro from Australia, he has 11, and so on, okay? My point of this is, and I employed this methodology myself, who do you think I pestered on email, Skype, and ResearchGate to talk to communicate with about this work? And the answer are these 6, right? So in the end, I became friends with all of them and got invited to conferences. And what a shot in the arm that was for my work and my research, right? After going to Australia and meeting everybody, because I had a big conference and these guys invited me because I'd been in contact with them and was publishing. So I got an all expense ticket to the Gold Coast, and but I met everybody, and then my whole research came together. Once I could have coffee and then talk to them about everything. So you can see the value. This is the value of the quantitative aspect of the systematic review, right? That we do our bibliometrics and we know exactly who's publishing and what their topics are, and et cetera, right? Ultimately make friends is the final stop.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Also, get over there, get back up there. Okay. Yeah. On my website, I've got most of all this stuff. Okay. So everything's there, including everything we're talking about. So I was kind of going to show this towards the end of the presentation, but this is my website. It's really easy to find it. Okay. And I use this a lot in teaching and stuff. And as you scroll down, there's a tab here for searching and referencing. So a lot of this stuff we're doing here, the whole presentation, systematic presentation is here. Okay, I won't show it to you now, but just so you know it's here. And if you go to my research tab, I have a list of my publications and the Google Scholar and ResearchGate and all that's there. And then these are my fields of study that I publish in mainly. So, and then I have a page for each one with everything you can download, right? So it's all there. The surf tourism stuff is, of course, here. And if you go to my publication page, I have pretty much everything's here. So peer-reviewed journal articles, all the stuff's here. The surf tourism is somewhere in here, 2011. Yeah. Okay, and other stuff all here as well. My 3 graduate theses, and then the conference proceedings. What I try to do is I put links and then make everything downloadable, right? So it's kind of all there. And then magazine articles. I used to write a lot of magazine articles. Okay, so this is something you might consider doing as well. Just making a page with your publications and stuff on it. So, okay, so everything's there is my point. Everything I'm talking about is there, and all these papers are there. Yeah. All right, well, I'll kind of hurry right along because I want to stay within our time. We'd like to finish by 11:30 with questions and everything complete. So in my case, for my systematic review, it was obvious that a trend analysis was going to be a good idea because it was a new body of research. So I wanted to look at the trend. And then what I did was I chopped the research into these, like, I created the 3 periods of development of this field of study, let's say, right? Because I was the first to review the literature in this way. And I created an early period, a formative period, and then a progressive period. And the idea was that most of the research appears here in this progressive period, right? And now this gets cited a lot in books and journals, and people write about this literature. They always say, Martin established the formative period, you know, so it turned out to be a rather clever idea because I get cited a lot. This surf tourism paper has over 100 citation in ISI journals, so that's pretty good, pretty high. Yeah, here, I guess I've said it here. And it led to my publishing 4 articles and 1 book chapter. Yeah, it was an outcome of having worked hard and done a big systematic review. Yeah. Okay, next. Second one is the Thai geography paper. This one, I did not call it a systematic review because I didn't want to go down that road of that methodology and explain that methodology and make it all systematic. This study was a little bit more, can we say, wobbly? You know, it was a little bit more, it was so broad and so difficult to pinpoint what Thai geography was and define it that the systematic was, I didn't want to use that word, but I still basically did a systematic review. I used the same methodology that I used in my approach to the other paper. Now I'm just 3 quick slides introduce the Thai geography case. This paper is really easy to find because it's also open source. I believe that the Journal of Tropical Geography, you can just download it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Otherwise, email me or go to my website. So in this case, what did I do in this paper that was sort of systematic in its nature? So I analyzed the only scholarly bibliography like ever published on geography, and I pulled the Thailand stuff out of it, if that makes sense, and then analyzed it statistically. And then I surveyed every journal on the TCI, 800 journals. That was a lot of work. But to identify which ones in Thai and which are international and et cetera. And I went through all the Thai library system databases. And you can sort of go down the list here from everything from going to bookstores. I basically did everything humanly possible to collect research on Thai geography. So this was sort of a set of methods or criteria for that. And then I created my own categories. And again, I stayed away from the term systematic in this case, but nonetheless, this is like straight out of my paper and I justify why gray literature and websites are so unique and important in this study. And then there was lots of this. Pretty much when you jump into Thai geography literature in English, international literature, your 90% of it is there. It's gray. It includes websites and then government and not-for-profit organizations mainly, right? But there were some other things, and this was also very difficult to frame So this paper took 5 years. This was no simple task in framing the literature, because once you go into social science, where does geography end and other fields of study begin? And I had to make that line, right? I had to explain what's in and what's out and why. And the referees from the journal, I had 7 referees, and they were all big name geography guys, and they really beat me up. So this was a heck of a thing. But then I also created this subtopic, regional geography resources, because Thailand is profoundly regional in its geographic makeup and in the how the research reflects that as well. And then of course the tourism geographies, a whole subset, a whole subfield. Yeah, but I you know, my job was identifying that and then backing it up. So I give one example, like as I did for the surf paper, in terms of the quantitative approach, right? So I have a number of tables in this paper, and we don't have time to look at them all and talk about them, of course, now. But an example of a kind of a quantitative approach in terms of publication. So international journals with 3 or more Thai geography publications, right? So we can see that the Journal of Siam Society had 14, and Malaysian Journal of Tropical Geography 11, and Journal of Tropical Geography 9, and the Singapore Journal of Tropical Geography. But look down here at my notes. This is a journal that's the same journal, it just changed name since 1950. And so here, if we look, it's called an antecedent, right? It's the previous journal before the journal, right? It antecedes the other journal. And so what the outcome of this, the key point is that the Singapore Journal of Tropical Geography was a #1 for publications in Thai geography. So I went there to publish, right? Which is, again, an outcome of this is you do this kind of work, and then you know where to look for a home for your paper. Now, I think it was a good choice, but it was a hard choice, because this journal's been around since 1950. And one of the rules, kind of rules of thumb, as they say, with journals is often the older, the more difficult, right, to get published. Right? The new journals are hungry, they're moving quick, they're trying to catch up. But the old journals, they're tough guys, and they're set in their ways. And to get published in the old journal sometimes is it's not easy, right? But this is a top-rated Web of Science journal, right? Okay, so I'm almost wrapped up. If you have questions, get them ready. In conclusion, what I hope you gather from this presentation is that systematic review is a silver bullet. It's the foundational silver bullet to conducting, writing, and publishing scientific research papers, right? So not just the systematic review itself, but the idea that you've mastered the literature and you can continue to publish quickly, go down this. These are the benefits. As I said earlier, desk research, field research, not required. Okay, today with coronavirus, this maybe is a good thing, right? Because I really wanted to go to Taiwan for my work for a paper that I just published. And, no, I'm not going, I can't go, right? I was in lockdown in my room. So it was a tough one. Systematic review is highly publishable in its own right. It'll get highly cited. So once you review or create a body of literature and review it, let's say you review it qualitatively and quantitatively, anyone who publishes in this field of study in the future is almost certainly going to cite you. So do you remember back when we saw the criteria to become a professor in Thailand, full professor? You needed to have 500 citations. no matter how many papers you have, whether one paper is cited once and another paper is cited 100 times, you need to have 500 citations. 500 authors have to have cited you to be eligible to apply for full professor, right? So this is important. You can write a paper, nobody cites you, and then, you know, you don't really get any future out of that, right? So it's a super literature review for future articles. You master the literature. I know I've said this already a couple of times, but you know, the long-term benefits are obvious. You get familiarity with scholars and fields in the study. Basically, you make friends, right? You may get invited to a conference. They might even pay for it. I was fortunate, like in that way. You identify the knowledge gaps, and then that justifies your future research. You have to think that you've created in a database. You know, so you do this paper, you get it published, but then you've got this database that's so useful for the future, right? So for example, you might go on and do a trend or a super systematic analysis, what they call a meta-analysis, right? And it may identify avenues of research, which is kind of what I showed, that I was able to identify what journals to maybe publish in. Right? A few suggestions and opportunities. So, you know, you create the corpus, basically, right? So this is, I basically said this. Well, how about this? And this has been profound for me. Like, once I got started on and then completed my Thai geography paper, it just completely became integrated with my research. I mean, it just became the basis of my research, right? I mean, I'm sorry, of my teaching, right? So for example, back to my personal website, if you can see the paper here. So I have like examples of my online courses here, and here is Pumisat Thailand, right here, Thai geography. So what I did is I built this page based on that paper, right? And you know, I start with some fun stuff because I'm trying to get the kids' attention. I have some videos I've made, this one here at Aquaria, and a few things. But as we go down it, here's the map that I published. So I built my own map for the journal article, but then I was able to use it on my website. And this blows up real big. It's super high quality. So I give map assignments. The students have access to the map. In this case, physical geography, right? And then see, I put access for my students here to the paper. And I think this will open up. Let's see, this will take us over to the journal, right? So here it is. And then there's the PDF. So if I'm talking with the students and they can go and just have this paper, if I can push them to actually read it or to look at it, right? And then what I have done down here on the bottom, I'm talking about integrating this systematic review approach into your teaching, right? And as we get down here, so these were some of the highlights out of that paper. Look, there's my annotated bibliography, for example, for ever published that's relevant like this to Thai geography from Thonchai Winnicall. And then I took a famous atlas that has some information. I have a few scans, not too many. I don't get in trouble for the copyright, but just a couple. And then some of you may remember this. This is currently used in high school, some high school classes in Thailand. Yeah, and the links to the not-for-profit organizations that I talked about in my paper. So these are actually the citations in my paper, and then they link out to the files, right? So I hope you get the idea of why I'm saying that you can integrate the work of a systematic review into your teaching like perfectly, you know? Yeah. And again, you master the field of study. That's it, you know, a huge thing. Okay, so the resources that I just showed you are all available here on my website, and John June has a copy of this presentation as well, so you can contact me if you'd like a copy of this or her. And with that, I say thank you and then ask for any questions, thoughts, suggestions, comments.
So thank you very much, Ajahn. So wonderful to have you here
Thanks,
today.
thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I hope everyone can get at least a small piece from your big thoughts,นะคะ. Thank you very much, ค่ะ.
And John, feel free to share it with anyone who's interested. That's fine. It's all for sharing. So, okay.
Thank you very much, ค่ะ.
Everybody, great. It was fun. Thank you.
Bye bye. Thank you. ขอบคุณค่ะ สวัสดีค่ะ. Thank you ค่ะ